Hi, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see you all. Karl Rove, of course, needs no introduction. He's been a fixture.
I'd sure like one, though.
Well, here you go. By the way, he might be a little punchy because he flew here from London and arrived last night. So he deserves special appreciation for that.
So be really gentle with me.
I will.
I'm in a vulnerable place.
It's not going to hurt at all, Karl, I promise. But let me finish.
I've heard that before.
Let me finish your introduction. He's been a fixture in the Republican Party for more than 50 years. I don't know how you like hearing that, Karl. He worked with former President George W. Bush on every one of his campaigns, earning the nickname The Architect for his role in 41's historic 2004 re-election campaign. These days, he's an author, Fox News contributor, Wall Street Journal columnist, and was an advisor to President Trump's 2020 campaign.
No, I wasn't.
You weren't?
No.
I don't know. I got bad information then.
Yes, you got very...
2016?
No.
Okay, never mind.
I did have one interesting meeting with him in 2020, if you'd like to hear about that.
I would. Go ahead.
So I get this, it's May of 2020. There was something going on in the country at that point. I can't remember exactly what. But I get this phone call from one of his top lieutenants who says, what do you think about this theory? We can't attack Joe Biden because he's so weak, so very weak, that if we attack him too much, Obama will withdraw him as the candidate, and then we'll replace him with Andrew Cuomo, and his running mate will be Michelle Obama. So we better not attack him. What do you think of that theory? And I said, I think that theory is just incredibly insane from top to bottom, and explained why. They said, oh, well, thank you very much. 2 days later, I get a call from another confidant to Trump. Says, what do you think of the same theory? And I said, this is incredibly lunatic. Thursday night, I get a phone call from Brad Parscale, with whom I had a cordial, weird relationship. And he said, act surprised, but on Saturday morning, you're going to get a call inviting you to have lunch next Wednesday with the president, because he wants to talk about this theory, your thoughts on this theory. And I'm like, no. So Saturday morning comes, 9 o'clock, the very pleasant Molly Michael calls me. Hi, this is Molly Michael. The president would like you to come and have lunch with him on Wednesday. Okay, a president asks you to come, you come. My wife says, what? We're in the middle of COVID. You're not getting on a goddamn airplane. So we call up her 94-year-old godfather, who's the biggest highway contractor in Texas, and Doug Pitcock loans me the Hawker, so I fly to Washington. And I walk into the Oval Office, been there once or twice. 15 people in the office, in the Oval Office. Trump says, Karl, you know everybody here? You know Jared, you know Ivanka? Hope Hicks, you know Hope? You know Mark Meadows, my new chief of staff. You know him, Mark. You know Brad. You know Rana. You know everybody, don't you? Everybody. Karl, last 6 months been good to me. Before that, not so good. He says, Karl, I want to talk about this theory. I'm really worried. Biden is so weak. In the basement in Wilmington, so weak. We attack him too much. Obama steps in. Andrew Cuomo, they pick him as their nominee. I can beat him. I've known him forever. I can beat him. But it'd be tougher, and they'll have Michelle Obama as the running mate, and what do you think? And I said, Mr. President, with all due respect, that's an insane theory. For the next 2 hours, we discussed the insane theory. Are you listening to this? This is so smart. Why are people not telling me that Michelle Obama hates politics? Why hasn't anybody told me that the people would think Obama was trying to get a third term? What Obama and Biden don't like each other? None of the people had read Biden's White House memoir, to find out how upset he was with his treatment. Anyway, I'm sitting there going, I am in the midst of one weird place at a weird time with a bunch of weird people. So, anyway, that's as close as I talked him out of worrying about Andrew Cuomo, the ticket of Andrew Cuomo and Michelle Obama in the 2020 election.
Karl doesn't really need me here at all, but you could just do a one-man show, Karl.
Couric and Rove, so bad. Losers, both of them, losers.
Okay. All right. Karl, Let's talk about the Republican Party, because actually the title of this conversation is The Elephant in the Room, which, believe it or not, I got from ChatGPT. I asked for a fun title for my conversation, and I thought they
So
came up
much
with a
for
good one.
artificial intelligence.
The elephant in the room could refer to so many things, but let's just start with, it's safe to say this is not your grandmother's GOP. I mean, what is your view of the current state of the party right now, Karl?
Well, first of all, you're right. It's not the party that I grew up in. But that's natural. Political parties change. This is not the same Democratic Party that I saw when I was growing up. This is not the party of Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson, and, it's just not. And parties change over time. And our party, my party, is changing. Parties tend to be driven by, in their process of change, by either big issues that come along and confront the American people, and the two parties take a position, the leaders of the two parties take positions, or by personalities. And unfortunately, my party is being driven largely by a personality. You have to give him credit. He is a charismatic individual who came just at the right moment when our political system was fractured and broken, and where the minority party, my party, was full of angry people who said, after 8 years of being disrespected, of being told, as President Obama famously said in February of 2009, I won. In other words, I'm not going to listen to you House Republicans who are down here to give me counsel. I won. Shut up. They felt that disrespected. And they wanted somebody more than anything else who would promise to take a brick and throw it through the plate glass window of American politics. And he did. And until we get through this moment of populism, and until the two parties get their acts together, the Republicans are not the only ones who are problematic, have problems. They're not. The Democrats have got them too. I see it in my home state of Texas. Zavala County in South Texas last voted for a Republican president in 1920. Warren G. Harding was leading the ticket. Hillary Clinton carried the county by about 25 points. Donald Trump carried it by 30. Why? Because the heavily Hispanic voters of that county said, we're making our living in energy. I'm driving a truck with a CDL license for the oil patch, and I'm making $110,000 a year, and my wife's working at the cafe and getting good tips from the oil field crowd, and those guys with a D behind their name, they're coming for my job. I already had doubts about them because I'm strong pro-life, because I'm a Catholic. I believe in patriotism because Hispanics volunteer for military service at a greater percentage than any other group in the American electorate. And I believe in family, and those people don't seem that they respect people like me. And not only that, but now they're coming for my job. And that's why we have this huge migration of Hispanics in South Texas into the Republican Party, because of issues and culture. But my party is roiled by the presence of Donald Trump, who's not a conservative, not even a Republican. I had an interesting meeting. If you like the first one, I'll give you the second invitation. So,
You just like to do a Trump imitation.
Yeah,
Are you
I
going to do it again?
It's not bad, I think.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. So I get a phone call. This is 2016, May of 2016. I get a call from a friend of mine who's also a frenemy of Trump's. Known him for 30 or 40 years, and is a frenemy. Donald Trump has no friends, but he has people who know him and are, on and off again. So my friend calls me. He says, Kiddo, will you write something nice about Donald? He's really upset. You haven't said anything nice about him. He just won Indiana. He's going to be the nominee. Will you write something nice about him? This is on a Wednesday afternoon. And I remember it was a Wednesday because I said, I've just finished writing my column. Let me read you my column for tomorrow. And I read him the column. And he said, oh, Donald's going to love it. He's going to love it. Will you do me a favor? At the end, when you say good, will you say very good? Okay, fine, I'll put very in there. Next morning, he calls me. He says, oh, my God, Donald's furious with your column. Long story short.
Who is this guy, by the way? Can you tell us?
No. But I'll be on his boat next week. So long story short, I end up getting dragooned into meeting Trump and to give him advice. I said, I don't want to give him advice. I'm not in the advice-giving business to Donald Trump. He said, well, he wants to know how you did it twice. And I said, fine. Okay, that's the construct. I'll come with a list of the things that you need to do. And so I go to the meeting, and You know, the first thing you need to do is have a strategy to get to 270 electoral college votes, and you have to have several different paths to get there. And I start going through the paths in 2000. We had to have the traditional battleground states that included places like Colorado. Back then, Missouri was a battleground state, et cetera. Florida, Ohio, et cetera. Then I said Great Lakes states, said there were 4 states, southern border states that had been carried twice by Clinton Gore and were historically Democrat, and we had to carry every one of them. Arkansas, the home state of the sitting president. Tennessee, the home state of our opponent. Kentucky, and West Virginia. And he said, West Virginia, I did really well there. They love me in the primary. I'm going to win West Virginia. I said, yeah, you're going to win West Virginia. But I said it was not a sure thing in 2000. The last time the Republicans had won West Virginia in an open race for the presidency was 1928, and it took nominating a Catholic from New York to bring out all the Presbyterians and Baptists and Methodists in West Virginia to vote Republican. Bob Dole lost it by 16 points. We won it by 6. And since then, the state has transitioned to a strong Republican stronghold, but back then it wasn't. He said, And I said, then there are Western states that we...
Give me a Diet Coke.
Yeah. Would somebody bring me some Cokes now? She would like a Coke. So then I said there were Western states that had been won at least once, and in one case twice by Clinton Gore, and we had to win at least 3 of the 4 states: Montana, Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon. He said, Oregon, I did really good in Oregon. Really good, really good. They like me out there. I can win Oregon. I said, no, you can't. He said, I won Oregon in the primary. I can win Oregon. I said, no, you can't. I said, in 2000, we had Ralph Nader on the ballot with a bunch of kooks and nuts in Eugene and Portland who were followers of his. And the Republicans were in a resurgence. They just won a U.S. Senate race, had 3 of 5 congressmen, had won the state House, were a couple of seats down in the state Senate, had 2 constitutional offices. But since then, a bunch of people have moved there from California, and the state's gone far left. The last time they won a statewide race was in 2006. They're down to 1 congressman out of 5. They've got minorities, almost veto-proof minorities in the legislature, and the state's gone to hell in a handbasket. And he said, well, I'll win California. I described to him why he was not going to win California, because a majority of the voters would be black, brown, or Asian, and particularly the brown voters don't like him. And he said, well, I'll win New York. I'll win New York. I'll win New York. I said, no, you're not. I said, you just had the primary, and more people voted for Bernie Sanders than voted for the entire Republican ticket combined. You're not going to win. You're not going to win New York. And every day you spend in a place like Oregon or New York or California is a day you can't spend in a state you can win, like a Pennsylvania or a Florida or a North Carolina or a Michigan or Wisconsin, that you need to win. And you need to spend all of your time, energy, and effort in the states that are part of your winning electoral coalition. He said, Anyway, we go on and on and on. This is about 3 hours long, and then he leaves, and then they keep me for about 45 minutes and then take me through the servants' elevator to the basement where we connect to the tunnel to the building south of where we are, and I emerge a block away from where I entered the building so that there would be no press. If anybody was there, they couldn't see me. So anyway, a week or 2 later, he goes and gives a speech in Pittsburgh. And I'd said, you got to spend all your time, your energy, and your money and your resources in the states that are your battleground states. And he says, I've got a strategy to win 270. I'm going to spend all of my time, all of my energy, all of my money, all of other people's money in the critical battleground states, and I've got 15 of them. And between now and the Republican convention, I'm going to tell you what they are. But today, I'm going to share with you 3 of my battleground states: Oregon, California, and New York. And I call up my friend and say, well, he got the principle right, but the execution leaves a little bit that we just,
So I guess you weren't an advisor.
No. Well, generally, the general principle, let's just say.
So you wanted him to be reelected in 2020?
I didn't want him to be wiped out. I care about my party, and the future of my party is having a bunch of people who are on the bubble, who are sensible and sane Republicans in marginal districts. I want them back. I want the congressman from Nebraska back, Don Bacon. I want Dan Sullivan to be there from Alaska. I want Peter Meyer in Michigan. I want good people who can represent the future of our party, not to get wiped out because we got some guy at the top of the ticket who's not attacking Joe Biden because he thinks he's going to be facing Andrew Cuomo and Michelle Obama if he does.
So it was the down ballot people you were trying to protect.
The future of our party is going to depend upon the people like I just saw Doug Ducey here. If Doug Ducey had been our Republican Senate candidate in Arizona, he would have won. And he represents the kind of the future of the party that I want. We were talking earlier with some people about Tony Gonzalez, represents the 23rd District of Texas, personal friend of mine. I held a fundraiser at my house for him. He represents the future of our party. And in a close election, I want people like that. Juan Ciscomani, who's here from Tucson, anybody? This is a brilliant young figure. This guy was born in Mexico, came here as a legal alien, a legal citizen at the age of 3, and he represents the future of our country. He's got a great future ahead of him, but he's in a district that's on the bubble. And you get a lunatic running a stupid campaign at the top of the ticket, and we're going to lose too many of those people, and we're going to be left with people who represent deep red districts and don't know how to communicate with the country as a whole.
All right, well, that lunatic still has a lot of support, as you call him, is made plain. I want to read something.
I was talking in a generic term.
I want to read something that Jonathan Martin wrote that landed in my inbox this morning, Karl. He wrote, as made plain in the NBC poll last weekend, half the party remains in the grip of a personality cult. What else to conclude from a survey that shows a narrow majority of Republican voters support a candidate just indicted on 37 felony counts? Even more arresting, 77% of GOP primary voters surveyed said the charges were either no cause for concern or only bothered them slightly. That's the marketplace Republican officials are working with. As many a former GOP lawmaker happily emancipated from a primary ballot will tell you, they don't have a Trump problem. They have a voter problem. You describe why the guy in Texas, the oil worker, couldn't quit him. But what about everyone else? Why does Donald Trump have such a hold on so many people in your party?
First, we're in a tribal moment where if you attack my guy or my gal from my party, we leap to their defense whether they deserve it or not. And second of all, Jonathan's a friend of mine, and we've had this discussion a lot. I think it is artificial to suggest that at this point in the contest, a 49% showing by Trump in the polls is indicative of where it's going to be in 6 or 7 months. If that were the case, in June of 2007, Hillary Clinton was leading Barack Obama 2.5 to 1. I think there's something else going on out there. I think there's 30 or 35% of the Republican electorate that is going to be with Donald Trump till the last dog is dead. But I think there is an element approaching about 40% of his supporters and 20 or 25% of the Republican electorate that is saying to itself, you attack him, you come after him with a stupid indictment in Manhattan on business records, I'm going to jump to his defense. But underneath the surface it is, I like what he did, but by God, he's got so much baggage, shouldn't we turn the page?
And how much is their enthusiasm for Trump predicated on a leadership vacuum, people who refuse to criticize him? As you remember, after January 6th, Kevin McCarthy condemned him. Mitch McConnell clearly wanted to vote to convict Trump in the second impeachment, but pulled back at the end. And by the way, if Trump had been convicted, he wouldn't be able to run again. Why are Republican leaders so reticent to speak out against him? And do you think that might have a trickle-down effect on some of the Trump loyalists out there?
First of all, I'm not going to be critical of people in elective office. Kevin McCarthy's got a job to do with a 5-seat margin, and Mitch McConnell has got a difficult task in a 51-49 Senate. And I want, again, I've got a great friend who's in the Congress, who is a wonderful human being in a district that has got a big Trump universe. And he comes out against Trump, and he's going to have a primary opponent. And I'd rather him remain mute than to have him be beaten.
So they're afraid to speak out for their own political hides, because they won't get reelected, or they won't be able to stay in power.
Or they may have a very tough primary. Now, some of them are. We were talking again about Tony Gonzalez. He'd been very clear. But Peter Meyer, to me, is one of the key examples. Trump is an unusual figure in that what drives him is rage and anger and a desire for revenge. So Peter Meyer, who's a wonderful human being, a great representative, is from a terrific family. How many of you are from the upper Midwest and shop at Myers? Anybody here? Yeah. I mean, this is like the Safeway of the upper Midwest. And he is a brilliant young man, but he voted for impeachment. And what happened? Trump went and got a guy to run against him and then backed him. And I don't mean just gave him his endorsement, but raised money, attacked Peter all the time. And Peter lost, barely. But he lost to a guy who could not hold the seat, and even if he held the seat, would be an embarrassment to the party. So I'm not going to be critical of people in office. I do think it is useful for every one of these candidates. They're going to have to distinguish themselves from Trump, and they've got to find ways to distinguish themselves from Trump on things of sum and substance. And whether that's his China policy or immigration policy or his failure on, you name it. And they got to leave it up to people like me to be critical of him on January 6th and on the classified records. But they got to more than that. They've got to be able to say to the Republican electorate, I have an optimistic and positive vision that makes it easier for you to say, you know what, I like Donald, but he's got too much baggage, and we need a younger face. Not to dwell on it, but the country is hungry for this. The day after the election, I was hired to speak at the 41st annual South Dakota Law Enforcement Gala. Anybody here from South Dakota? Okay, for 41 years they've been having this damn thing. And they hire, Colin Powell spoke in there, Barbara Bush spoke there, 43 spoke there. They hire a patriotic speaker. About 2,500 people are in a gigantic barn in Sioux Falls, and it is America. It's red America, but it's America. Every county commissioner, every state, they got the Supreme Court Chief Justice leads everybody in the Pledge of Allegiance. We got Suey Morris, who many of you may remember sang the national anthem last year at the state fair, is here tonight to lead us all in singing our national anthem. And Father Jones from the St. All Mercy's Catholic Church, who's been given the invocation benediction for the last 35 years, is here for number 36. Father Joe, get up here. And I mean, it is like America. They said, give a patriotic speech and then save lots of time for Q&A. So I gave the patriotic speech, turned to the Q&A. Guy gets up in the back of the room, question number 2. He says, what do you think about Joe Biden running for president at the age of 82? I said, well, let me piss off every Democrat in the room. I think it's bad for our country. I happened to work in that place for 7 years. I know exactly what it demands of any human being. Every president that goes in there comes out 4 years later looking a hell of a lot older, and for good reason. But I said, let me piss off every Republican in the room. 78-year-old ain't much better. I said, our country deserves better than this. Our country faces big challenges, and we'd be better off if we had somebody other than the 78-year-old and the 82-year-old running for president. And guess what? 2,500 people stood up and cheered. That's in red America. So somebody is going to have to come along out of the Republican field, or hopefully several people, and start to light that fire that, by God, we can do better than this.
That's a great segue to my next question. I'm going to run down the list of Republican candidates because I'm sure everyone would like to hear your take on all these folks. Ron DeSantis, he seemed like a rocket ship 6 months ago, but since then he called the war in Ukraine a territorial dispute, launched his campaign in a glitch-filled audio-only Twitter announcement, and signed a host of very conservative bills, including a 6-week abortion ban, which is basically a total ban on abortion. So I know when you and I talked, gosh, a number of months ago with David Axelrod at an event, you said, basically, he has no personality, terrible retail politician. Share what you think of Ron DeSantis, both his campaign and as a person.
Yeah, after we were together, I wrote a column saying that the media was too quick to write him off. Yeah, he's got problems. He's not the warmest, fuzziest personality around, but he has done a lot of things that people in the Republican Party applaud, particularly taking on woke. And the thing that got him big in the polls last fall was the one thing they knew about him, which was that in a purple state, battleground state, he won re-election by 20 points and took the Republican Party into a supermajority in the state legislature and put the Republican Party into the majority on the registration rolls for the first time. The New York Times said for the first time in 20 years, there are more Republicans in Florida than there are Democrats. Shit, there are more Republicans than Democrats for the first time in the history of Florida, not the last 20 years. And so that's what they knew about him. And the question is going to be, how good is he going to get? None of these people are prepared for this.
What about the Disney thing, Karl? I mean, doesn't he come across as incredibly petty and anti-business?
Well, he does to defenders of Disney, but to the people who sort of say Disney had it coming to them, they not. And look, I'm not in favor.
But Disney's such a huge employer for Florida. I mean,
yeah, but
they have it coming to
Disney
them because
also,
they want to expand and welcome LGBTQ.
No, Disney is a big employer, yeah. But Disney also is something that is not good in our society, and that is you're a big business and you get special privileges. Literally, they elect the governing unit that sets the tax rates and governs Disneyland, consisted of 5 people who are Disney employees who are given property inside the area. And they have special privileges that Universal Studios and every other similar institution in the Orlando area doesn't have. So I wouldn't have picked it and made it the centerpiece, but I'm also not going to criticize him for saying, you know what, everybody ought to be treated equally. And just because you are Disney doesn't mean that you get treated differently than Universal Studios and everybody else.
All right, what advice would you give Ron DeSantis going forward?
Keep doing what he's doing, which is start answering questions, have his wife there because she warms him up, start paying attention to people on a one-to-one basis, and realize that you're not running for the presidency of the United States, you're running for first or second position in Iowa and New Hampshire, which is a big different deal, which means you start paying attention to, who's the county commissioner in a little county in Iowa, and who's the city council member in Bow, New Hampshire.
And what they care about in Iowa and
what
New
they
Hampshire.
care about in New Hampshire. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Christie. I mean, he's been such a pit bull, really criticizing Trump. Is that going to backfire? Help him what?
I think he plays a vital role in starting to be part of the solvent that takes Trump's hands off of the Republican Party. Because if you'll notice so far, it's virtually all of it is about substance. You told us that you're going to build the wall and Mexico would pay for it. You didn't build the wall and Mexico has yet to give us any money. You're a blowhard. I'm going to get things done. And that is a useful voice to be heard.
What advice would you give him?
Keep doing what you're doing.
Okay. People apparently don't need your advice, Karl.
Maybe they're doing what they're doing because they asked for my advice earlier than you.
Oh, okay. Touche. Okay. All right, Mike Pence.
Mike Pence is if you were buying stocks in Iowa, he's an undervalued stock. People forget that in Iowa, in those caucuses, probably 40% of the vote are going to be self-identified evangelical Christians. And particularly in northwest Iowa, that's going to be dominant. And ironically enough, last time around, the battle for the evangelical vote in Iowa was between 2 people, Theodore Cruz and Donald Trump. And Mike Pence has the ability to unify that. I think it's more difficult to see him long term, but again, this is a process of dealing blows to Trump, and he can deal an important blow to Trump in Iowa.
Nikki, I have to ask you, what advice would you give him? Have you already told him already?
I've sort of indicated my openness to giving advice because it costs me nothing, and all it takes them is a simple phone call. But yes.
You've talked to him?
I've talked to his people, and I've talked to him. We had a gigantic voter registration effort in Texas. When I went to Texas, there were 16 Republicans out of 150 in the Texas House, different in the Texas State Senate. We had in one election, Phil Gramm was a Democrat back then. We had in the Texas State Senate an election, 31 members in the Senate, and in one election alone, we had increased our numbers in the state Senate by 50%. We'd gone from 2 to 3. And we'd had a brief period of time in which we didn't have a Republican governor, 114 years. So Texas changed, and I happened to be there for it, and Phil was there for it, and we were part of it. And then we started to lose. So I said, to hell with it. I got lots of things to do, but I want to help reinvigorate my party. So we had a voter registration effort. And to reward the donors, we had 2 conferences, one after the 2020 election and one after the 2022 election. And Mike Pence came to both of them. The only person who, when he walked into the room, each one of them appeared for 45 minutes. The first time we had Tom Cotton, Christie, Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Marco Rubio, Rick Scott, and Tim Scott. This time around, we had Tim Scott again, Mike Pence again. We had Christie again. We had Brian Kemp. I'm going to leave out a bunch. But anyway, we had them all. The only person who, when he walked into the room and walked onto the stage for his 45-minute interview, who immediately got a standing ovation was
Mike Pence.
And it was because people said, I may be for you or I may not be for you, but by God, you were a man of courage on January 6th, and you deserve our applause and appreciation.
Let me ask you about a couple of other candidates, then you can tell me if there's anyone else we should be paying attention to. Nikki Haley.
Full disclosure, I hosted a dinner for her this year at my house for the conference. She came in the night before, so I said to people, if you want to come and have dinner with her. We shoveled 52 people into my gigantic living room to have dinner. I'm really impressed with her.
She doesn't seem to be getting much traction.
You know what?
Or is it too early?
It's too early. And the kind of attraction you're getting now is people in New Hampshire and Iowa saying, you know what, I need to pay attention to that person. And I've been long. I was the speaker when she was running for governor. I was the speaker at the South Carolina Republican big fundraising dinner. I was seated at the head table, which was right in the middle of this gigantic ballroom, and my seatmate was Governor Mark Sanford, who just returned from the Appalachian Trail, if you get my drift. So nobody wanted to come up and talk to him. And all of the 5 or 6 candidates, lieutenant governor and the blah, blah, and the blah, blah, and the blah, blah, all of whom were running for governor, were sitting around in their various parts of the room. And South Carolina, each one of these early states is different than another. South Carolina, think of it as a feudal empire. So you have the prince of the upcountry, and you have the baron of the low country, and you have the duke of the PD, and so they're all sitting there, and people were coming up to all these candidates for governor, kissing the ring, saying hello. They just sat at their table, and people came up and paid their respects. Door at the far end of the room blows open, and in comes this woman, and she is like working every table, and she's saying hello to everybody, and she's making a particular effort to go up to the table of every one of her opponents and clap them on the back and look them in the face and laugh with them for a minute and then move on. Nikki Haley. And I said, that woman is going to beat the hell out of these guys, and she did. And I think that she has got the level of energy that a lot of these people will find themselves needing in this kind of an effort.
Tim Scott.
Remarkable story. 2 years ago, at our first visit, he was interviewed by Kevin Brady, who was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And Kevin started off saying, Tim, we got to know each other during the 2017 tax battle, and you were the big proponent of opportunity zones, and tell us about opportunity zones, and blah, 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 for about 5 minutes. And then he said, Tim, enough of that. He said, I want people to get to know you like I know you. And you don't know what I'm going to ask you, and I haven't shown these to you in advance, and I apologize for being too personal, but I want them to know you like I know you. So, Tim, when was the first time that you realized that somebody hated you because of the color of your skin? And the next 40 minutes was one of the most remarkable periods I've ever seen in politics, because these two men talked about his life and what it was like not to know his father, and what it was like to be, grow up in a troubled, living with his grandparents, being sent to work to help support the family. I mean, you got a sense of this guy. This year, we sent out a questionnaire. We said, who do you want to have back? Tim Scott was the #1 one to come back. And so Senator Cornyn, Senator Graham's successor, said, I want to interview him this year. And so they got to talking about the future of the Republican Party. And the two men got going. And Tim Scott is like really revved up. And in the middle of an answer, gets up with his microphone, walks off the stage, and starts wandering through the 450 people that's sitting at a table saying, don't you think our party needs to do this? Well, what about if our party did that? And people, it was like, amen, brother, amen. This guy can rouse a crowd. Now, is he going to be able to move from being able to rouse a crowd to having people say, I see that this guy has what it takes to make decisions in the Oval Office? That's going to be the key test for him. But he's going to start at a place where very few of this crowd are, which is the ability to rouse a crowd of complete and total strangers.
So maybe, if not this go round, he's young, right?
He's young. I mean, think about it. Our oldest candidate will, at the time of the election next year, be 61. Can I give you a really crackpot theory?
Yeah.
I think we're at a point in our country's history where people are dying for a generational shift.
I agree.
1960, we had an admirable president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. History now looks back on him far more benevolently than we did at the time, but we thought he was a good guy. But he was born in the 19th century. And people said, you know what, we want to pick from one of these two young veterans, ironically enough, of the Pacific Theater, the 41-year-old Jack Kennedy and the 45-year-old Richard Nixon. And that's what our choice came down to. And for the next 32 years, we are governed by men from the greatest generation. Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and finally, Reagan's successor, 41, who is at the age of 18, the youngest Navy fighter pilot in World War II. And then along comes a baby boomer. Bill Clinton gets the same percentage of the vote that Michael Dukakis gets, but in a three-way race, that was enough. And for 32 years, we've been governed by men from the baby boomer generation, or in the case of Joe Biden, the generation before the baby boomers, the so-called silent generation. And I think people are looking at this saying, in this country, it's time for a generational shift. And I think the party that figures that out has the upper hand for next year. The Democrats have a big bench. They could pick a lot of people off that bench and easily claim a victory next year. The Republicans have a big bench. They could, if they claim anybody except the old guy, it's the 78-year-old, I think they're going to have the upper hand next year. If we're stuck with Biden and Trump, it is going to be an election that's going to be close, that either man could win, and it's going to come down, who do we dislike less? Not who do we like more.
And do you think those two will be the nominees? Well, obviously Biden will.
You know, if I had to bet today, I'd bet on Trump, but I'd take the field against him. And I'd bet on Biden, but I'd take the field against him. I just think there's something going on out there that, and I feel stronger about Trump not being the nominee. I do think I mean, you're 49% of the vote, and you're the former president. That means 51% of the people have already made up their mind they're going to be for somebody else. And I think this thing, as we go to trial and we see more about how he mishandled highly classified information and treated it as childish mementos, that people are going to say, you know what, he's got too much baggage.
What about the argument, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. I have so many questions. I'm so bummed, but you've been great. But all these questions, maybe you'll talk to me after this.
She's guilting me right now, and I feel guilty.
No.
Very guilty.
No, but what about this claim that there's a double standard? I mean, you hear that from so many Republicans. Well, Biden took classified documents, and Hunter Biden's prosecution was, not fair or whatever.
Yeah,
this double standard, is that resonating?
Yeah, it is. Let's put Hunter Biden aside. I do think there is a double standard for Hunter Biden. I mean, please, the week that he pleads guilty to not paying his taxes, he does not have the courtesy not to go to the India State dinner. We all get treated to him looking at the India State dinner. I mean, you some bitch didn't pay your taxes. And not only that, but you didn't pay your taxes at all and got away with it on Burisma. You know, because the U.S. Attorney in D.C. and the U.S. Attorney in the Central District of California refused to take those charges. That's where you had to file the charges on the Burisma money. So put him aside. But on the other thing, yes, with some part of the party, it has a purchase. But again, not to dwell on personal experience. The week that he was indicted, I happened to be in Amarillo, Texas, when all of this kerfluffle happened. You talk about a red part of the country, Potter and Randall counties. I mean, they hunt Democrats with dogs up there. And I was in front of a crowd. The young leadership of Amarillo, the city fathers do a good job of trying to get the next generation. And sitting in the audience is Congressman Jackson, former White House physician, who is one of the biggest Trumpers around. And so I get the question, isn't this unfair? And I said, no, it's not. I said, I lived in that place for 7 years. He violated the Presidential Records Act. No president is supposed to leave with any scrap of paper except his personal journal or anything he declares to be personal in advance, and the papers with regard to his political activities as a presidential candidate and in support of other candidates. That's all that you're allowed to take. And so we got into this. And, I got a lot of heads nodding. I said, do you really want a president to be able to decide to take secret materials out? And then
did he say, what about Biden? He
can say what about Biden, but the answer on that is he took them. And as soon as they found him, they returned him. That's not what this guy did. This guy knowingly walked out with box after box after box after box after box containing hundreds of classified materials, knew they were there, and doesn't seem to understand.
And showed them to people.
And showed them to people, and also did not seem to understand, in the White House, there is a job called staff secretary. Sounds like a nothing burger, doesn't it? That person sees every piece of paper that goes to the president. Do you know who George W. Bush's staff secretary was? Brett Kavanaugh. This has to be held by a very accomplished person. Underneath the staff secretary is the Office of Records Administration, set up under the Presidential Records Act, which keeps a log of all those pieces of paper that go to the president. In the National Security Council, there's a separate log that keeps a duplicate log of every classified piece of information that goes to the president. So inside the White House, there are 2 logs of every one of those documents. So within a matter of days after he left the White House on January 20th, the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, knew exactly what, or they didn't know exactly, they knew that hundreds of classified documents were missing. And they started asking in no later than May of 2021, and probably as early as March, will you return them? Now, when they said to Biden, you got a classified document, return them, they immediately searched and returned them. So did the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, former Vice President, because he had a couple of classified documents. They did not engage in a 1.5 year long effort to hide the fact that he was holding on to classified documents, and during that process to require people to lie to the U.S. government. In June of 2022, we have the lawyers say, we've conducted a, quote, diligent search, and we don't find any materials that are in response to the subpoena, and they know that they're lying. Now, how do they know that they're lying? I bet you a dime to a dollar when they take this to the trial, some of the people who are going to verify that there were classified documents and the president knew them are people who carry a badge and a gun. Members of the Secret Service. They have no statutory responsibility for the maintenance and upkeep of classified documents, but they're sworn federal law enforcement officers, and they have a moral responsibility to report a crime. And I bet you a bunch of them said, you know what? I saw him waving around the Kim Jong-un letters. You're here at Mar-a-Lago tonight for you'll take to get the prime rib. It's really good tonight. I had a wonderful relationship with Kim Jong-un. Would you like to hear the letter he wrote me? Molly, give me the Rocket Man file. I mean, please.
Karl, we're still waiting for the January 6th to see if there's an indictment for January 6th, the Georgia case. Tony Gonzalez, who you mentioned earlier, congressman from Texas, told me yesterday the more Trump is indicted, the more enthusiastic his support.
I disagree.
At some point, is that going to change?
Yeah, no, I disagree. The more enthusiastic an element of his support is. But look, not all Republicans are idiots. And there are a lot of people who are in this tribal moment are saying, you know what, I liked what he did, but God dang it, can we win if we have that kind of baggage around him? And I think I think that is a continuing effort. I mean, look, I travel a lot. People come up to me in the airport, where's your whiteboard? Please, they're expensive, and I have to buy them myself. But you know, we get into discussions, and about half the time people say, I really love Trump, but can he win? And I say, no, I don't think he can win. And they say, well, that's sort of how I feel. I liked what he did, but we need to turn the page. We need to start a new chapter. I need to find somebody else. Now, maybe that's just the kind of people that I run into, but I think that sentiment is below the surface. And I think that if you're the former sitting president of the United States and you get 49% in the survey, that's a problem. Just incidentally, as it is, if you're the sitting president of the United States and the new NBC poll comes out and 64% of Democrats say they're for you, when you've got a incredible lunatic with all kinds of conspiracy theories and a crystal and wellness person running against you, like, please, the both people that we've got at the top of their.
Wait, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about Marianna Williamson and Robert Kennedy Jr. Running against Joe Biden, who's getting less than 2/3 of the support of the Democrats. And I mean, please, I mean, what? This guy, Kennedy, no, I know his cousins. No wonder they hate the guy. I mean.
Yeah, but he's getting all sorts of support from Silicon Valley. I mean, it's kind of it's kind of shocking how many people, he's resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah, and yet every day last week he took the convicted child sex offender, Scott Ritter, on his podcast so the two of them could talk about what a smart guy Vladimir Putin was and how it was our fault that he invaded Ukraine. And I'm going like, what kind of a moron are you? On several levels. And yet he's getting, depending on how you look at it, between 16 or 17% of the primary vote and 20 or 25% of the vote, which I say is the last name and a desire not to be for Biden.
I want to ask you one question, then I'm going to open it up. Maybe we'll go a little bit over if that's okay with everybody. What about overturning Roe v. Wade? A lot of, it's sort of like the dog catching the car, right? And it's evaporated an issue that was so powerful for a lot of GOP candidates. And I'm curious, many don't want to use the A word out on the campaign trail for alienating a lot of voters, especially suburban women. Yeah. So how is that going to play out in 2024? And while you're at it, what about the recent Supreme Court decisions, affirmative action? We just heard about the web designer. They support the web designer who doesn't want to work for the gay couple. What impact will all this have, Karl?
Yeah, well, we're in the midst of a culture war, and both sides got to be careful about this because particularly abortion is not an easy, simple, either for it or against it. 2/3 of the American people were opposed to Roe v. Wade being overturned. 2/3 of the American people oppose abortion in the second and third trimesters. So the Democrats, if they go out there and say, no, we don't want the parents to be involved in the decision of their teenage daughters, and you ought to be able to have an abortion right up to the time of birth, they're in trouble. If the country was, 6 months before Dobbs, if you'd said to Republican pro-lifers, would you be willing to settle for a law that says 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, rape, incest, life of the mother, maybe one other nature of the pregnancy, would you be willing to settle for that? They'd say, yeah, we'll settle for that in a nanosecond. But Dobbs has now got in my party a bunch of people who say, no abortions, no exceptions.
If a 10-year-old is raped by her father, she has to go to another state.
And if you don't agree with me, I'll see you in a primary. But don't kid yourself. This is a problem for Democrats. This is not an unalloyed positive for Democrats. Remember last year, 2022? Mike DeWine started out in life as a lawyer for pro-life and Catholic causes. And he won re-election in what used to be a purple state by 27 points against a credible Democrat. DeSantis, in a purple state, won by 20 points. In my home state of Texas, Greg Abbott signed a tough pro-life measures. Robert Francis O'Rourke, I refuse to say the phony nickname, made it a big issue and ran television ads and got his ass kicked. So both sides have got some problems here. We have a national consensus if we were willing to take it, which is somewhere between 10, 12, 14 weeks, 3 exceptions, parental consent. That's something that, we'd have 2 out of 3 Americans or better being in favor of. But we're not going to get there without going through a battle of extremists. One group saying no abortions at all, and the other saying no restrictions at all on any kind of abortion. And until we get sane and sensible people who say, let's find an area where we can have broad agreement. And unfortunately, that means we'll have a law like France, which I never thought we would settle on, but we probably will.
What about affirmative action and the cases I just mentioned?
Look, remember that, again, this is one where the left is going to make a mistake if they say make a big deal out of it.
Because I think 2/3 of Americans support what the Supreme Court did.
They did. And remember, one of the states that in a referenda voted to remove race as a condition of application to a college, California.
That's right. Let me, okay. Request, make your question short and to the point, no speeches, thank you. We have Mike, we're going to just do, okay, how about this gentleman here? Hi.
What do you think about the effort of the No Labels organization around a possible third-party candidacy?
Yeah, I understand that the logic behind a no labels insurance policy, if we end up with Trump and Biden, could there be somebody on a third-party label who comes in as a savior? First of all, who's a savior? It ain't Joe Manchin, not after Inflation Reduction Act vote. It's not Bill McRaven, my friend in Austin, my neighbor. There is no big sterling figure there. Maybe somebody emerges, but I understand, and I'm not going to be critical of the insurance policy approach, fine. but I'm not certain I see somebody. And they've not thought this thing through. One of its principal backers and underwriters called me and said, what are you thinking? I said, well, good for you. Okay, fine, I get it. Better uses for your money, but okay. Understanding you feel strongly about it. But I said, have you thought through what happens once you establish a line in all 50 states? And they will have a line in all 50 states. I've seen the plan. They have the money to do it. It's mechanical to get there. It's going to cost them $50 million, but they're going to get there. But I said, what happens then? We've got a Senate election next year in Texas and 38 members of the House. What happens when a lunatic says, you know what, I want to be the no labels candidate for the Senate? And I'm a vegetarian. I'm going to run on the, we will outlaw the beef industry. You know, what happens? You know, this actually, in 1912, this was an issue facing the Progressive Party. And back then, the National Committee, the Executive Committee of Theodore Roosevelt's third party could say, in order to be a candidate of our party, you have to win our approval. But that's not what the law says now. So you'll have a bunch of nuts next year if they get their party label who are going to be running for Congress and state legislature and Senate and governor and senator and president on the no labels party line.
As you can see, Karl's a political historian too. Okay, quickly, right, the gentleman in the front.
And then the next one is this guy in the blue back there.
Okay.
Thank you. First, I'm a vegan most of my life, and I would never outlaw the beef industry. My wife's...
Would you be a candidate for president?
No. To quote you, and I agree, we've got some problems here. My question for you, honestly, is how, specifically how, do you see your vision of politics for your party, or for any party? How do you see a grand vision to bring together people who are, and I'm going to say this positively and honestly so I don't offend anybody, who are pro-life and who are pro-choice, who are pro-gun rights and who are pro-gun rights regulation, who are pro-X and pro-Y? How do you see your party, your vision, yourself bringing together people? I've heard candidates that you say are ideal, but what is the how, the way into bringing Chuck Schumer and you pick your party representative together?
I'm not certain you can bring together Chuck Schumer and Phil Gramm in the same party. In fact, I'm pretty confident you can't. But let me rephrase your question. How do we get there are two ways to answer that. One question is, how do we get our politics back to a place where we actually are functioning better than we are today? And how do I work to get my party back in a place where I think it represents a more positive and optimistic vision for the future? There are lots of things there that I think individual Republicans can do, starting with picking a good candidate for president, and also then picking good candidates for lesser offices and getting re-engaged in the activities of the party. In Texas, we have 14,000 delegates allocated to our state convention. Last year, 4,000 people attended. And all it took was 2,001 lunatics in order to write a stupid platform and to do stupid things. So we all need to get back involved. Let me seize on the first part of your question, though, to sort of maybe wrap this up. Our politics is broken today. Both parties are broken. Nobody could be happy with what's going on. There are some good things going on. We don't give attention to the good things that are going on. Think about three big things that happened last congressional session that happened not because the White House was in charge, and not because the Speaker of the House and the President and the Majority Leader in the Senate said this is our priority. We had the China bill, we had the infrastructure bill, and we had the gun measure by Murphy and Cornyn after Uvalde. And why did they happen? The China bill, the chip bill happened because we had a freshman Republican from Indiana named Todd Young who said, I'm really worried about what happens to our economy if China invades Taiwan and the foundries from which 80 or 90% of our chips come from are suddenly unavailable to us because they've either been destroyed or taken control of by the Chinese. What do we do about it? And he finds out that the senior Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner of Virginia, has the same interest, so the two men start talking. And out comes a chips bill. Now, I'm not certain I'm in agreement of everything in there, but two men said, let's put aside partisanship and see if we can't get a consensus among our colleagues on something important. Infrastructure bill was actually the reauthorization of the Highway Trust Fund, which has happened every 5 years since 1957. And every session, every 5 years, the House or Senate takes the lead. And last time around, it was the House's lead. And the House chairman of the House Transportation Committee, who thankfully is now gone, says, I want to reauthorize the Highway Trust Fund. But normally what happens is it's like they reauthorize it largely the same that they've always done. But there's a little thing on the edge. We're going to have a demonstration project for turning unused urban rail lines into hike and bike paths, or we're going to have a little bit more money for mass transit, or we're going to do this thing or that thing on the edges. The House Transportation Committee chairman says, we're going to reauthorize the Highway Trust Fund bill with the following provision. No monies appropriated under this act may be used to increase capacity on any federal interstate highway or to create any additional new mile of interstate highway. Think about that for a minute. How idiotic is that? And so the Senate Democrats on the Transportation Committee went to their Republican colleagues and said, we don't want that piece of trash coming over here. Can we find an agreement to reauthorize the Highway Trust Bill like we've normally done it, and we'll take the lead. It ain't our turn, but if we move first, we'll keep them from sending us that stupid bill. And while we're at it, since we came to an agreement on reauthorizing the Highway Trust Fund, oh, geez, can we find an agreement on a reasonable amount of money, roughly $30 billion a year for the next 10 years to spend on infrastructure that we think will help improve our economy? Ports, airports, railroads, intermodal transfer points, et cetera, et cetera. And they did. Now, again, I may not agree with everything in it, but again, it was done without the White House. In fact, the White House said, we don't want that bill to move because we're afraid it will undermine support for Build Back Better. And the same thing happened between Murphy and Cornyn on the gun bill. And we don't applaud it. It was, look, John Cornyn comes down hunting on my lease every year in South Texas. He's got almost as many guns as I have. He's a Second Amendment guy, as am I. But we believe in applying the laws strictly. And do you know what happened in Uvalde? That kid did things as a teenager that made it impossible for him to purchase a weapon. And at the age of 18, poof, it all went away, and he went out and bought an AR-15 and 300 rounds of ammunition and shot up a bunch of people and killed a bunch of kids. What Cornyn and Murphy said was, we're going to say that for the purpose of purchasing a weapon, at the age of 18, those things don't go away. They go away for the purpose of you being able to join the military or get a job, but they're not going to go away for the purpose of you purchasing a weapon. Because we don't want that kid to be able to say, I did a bad thing before I turned 18, and just after I turned 18, it went away. While I'm on it, nobody recognizes what these guys did after Sutherland Springs. Do you remember this a couple of years ago? We had the guy who was kicked out of the Air Force who takes an AR-15 and kills, like, I think 20 people at a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, near San Antonio. And Murphy and Cornyn came together. You know what they found out? That guy had been kicked out of the Air Force for something that made it impossible for him to buy a weapon, and the Air Force had failed to communicate to the National Crime Information System that he had done that bad thing. In fact, it turned out only one service, the Marine Corps, was reporting people who had an offense in the military that allowed them not to buy a weapon. And in addition, blue states and red states were either failing to provide information in a timely fashion or failing to provide accurate and complete information. Idaho, they said, you know what, shit, we don't want to send that stuff off. We'll get around to it when we get around to it. Washington State next door says, well, that's really not important for us. That's a federal thing. So Murphy and Cornyn said, we are going to put strict penalties on every federal agency in every state for failure to provide the information to the NICS system, National Crime Information System. They're going to be tough penalties. You've got 2 years to get your act together. And then if you don't do it in a timely fashion, an accurate fashion, there are heavy sanctions against the state or federal agencies. Within 2 years, everybody was in compliance. Do you know how many pieces of information were added to the NICS system, not representing individuals alone, but each instance represents an act by an individual that should not have been allowed to purchase a weapon? You want to guess how many instances they added to this NICS system? 10,000? 20,000? Anybody? 8 million. 8 million instances where somebody did something that said you shouldn't have been able to purchase a weapon, and we were not enforcing the law, and that guy killed 20-some-odd people, and it was preventable because we weren't enforcing the law. And we don't celebrate successes like that. We're going to get to a point, though, where enough is enough. where we start electing people who are going to act like adults, and where the adults in the Congress are going to start acting like adults. And it's happened time and time again. It happened after the 70s. It happened after the 30s. There's a brilliant book out on the Gilded Age. I strongly recommend it to you, The Triumph of William McKinley. I think I did a hell of a job with it myself, but it's also about how bad the Gilded Age was. We go through these periods in American history, and we forget it. We forget how bad the 60s and 70s were. We forget how bad the 30s were. We forget how bad the Gilded Age were when they literally were still fighting the Civil War on the floor of the House of Representatives. Thomas Jefferson, I'll close by that. Remember him? Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia, third president of the United States, the guy who brought about the Louisiana Purchase. Do you remember his election ended in a tie in the Electoral College? Do you remember that? It did. And it was a tie not between him and John Adams, the guy he beat. Back then, you voted for the president and the vice president separately. You voted for one, and the number 2 guy became the vice president, and your running mate was supposed to get a couple of his guys to throw away their vote so he'd come in behind you. His running mate, Aaron Burr, failed to tell anybody from New York, be sure and throw away your vote. So it is a tie in the Electoral College between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson on December 6th of 1800. It's turned over to the House of Representatives. It meets in the middle of February of 1801. They meet in the middle of a blinding snowstorm, and they vote to elect the President of the United States, 1 vote per each one of the 16 states, 9 votes required, and Burr is trying to steal the presidency from Thomas Jefferson. And on the first ballot is inconclusive, and it's only inconclusive because Maryland and South Carolina are deadlocked. And Maryland is only deadlocked because one of the Democratic congressmen from Maryland, who's thought to be dying, insisted upon being carried on a stretcher through a blinding blizzard in Washington in order to be installed in the meeting room so he can deadlock Maryland and keep the vote from going to Burr. They vote every hour on the hour for the next 24 hours, every vote inconclusive. They finally say, let's vote 1 time a day and see if we can find a resolution to this. On the 37th ballot, it breaks by the intervention of an unlikely figure, Alexander Hamilton, who's written a letter to the one congressman from Delaware, George Berry, and he says, I hate them. I hate them both. I hate Jefferson, I hate Burr. But at least Jefferson has character and Burr has none. Go for the lesser of 2 evils every time. And on the 37th ballot, Baird says, I'm out of here, convinces his compatriots from South Carolina and Maryland, the Federalists, to throw in a towel, convinces a colleague from Vermont to walk out to leave the Vermont vote to be cast for Jefferson. And on the 37th ballot, Thomas Jefferson is elected President of the United States and sworn into office 13 days later. Now, tell me we haven't been screwed up before. We have been.
Good Lord. No wonder they call him George Bush's brain. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry we're out of time. Karl Rove, thank you so much, Karl.